Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're good. Let's put my frame on so I don't feel naked. I think that's all working all right, but I just had a bit of a scare. The camera wasn't working, couldn't hear the rather loud intro music, etc. So do let me know as ever. And I promise you that if you keep just letting me know for a few more shows, then I won't keep asking next year. I won't keep coming on these things paranoid that you can't hear me. I'm Jack Chew. We come here weekdays at 12:30 till 1 to chew it over, whatever's topical at the time. And we are coming to our last few shows. So this week, I've promised myself a couple of weeks off for Christmas, at least from this, at least from some bits of my work. And so no show tomorrow because the kids are now in nursery, not full time, but essentially in a couple of days. And Charlotte's back at work. Today's her first day. And so tomorrow, I'm in childcare duties in the afternoon. So no show tomorrow. And then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, be some really great shows about summarising what's been a mad year. So I've got Evie Martin on Wednesday, Rob Bevans joining me to talk about business and clinic stuff and what the adaptations have been required of us, as well as announcing a co-project that me and Rob have got together. And then on Friday, I'm going to do a show in which I've made a few notes of some deep reflections as to my take on the year, which I really hope you can join me for. So if you're going to tune into one show this week, then make sure it's the Friday one. But of course, I want you on the journey with us all together in the next few days as we summarise and contemplate what the year's brought us. And then I'm off for a couple of weeks and then back in the new year, bigger and better than ever. So I'm going to stop asking as to whether you can hear me or not every time we open every show. Also going to turn the volume down on that music as it doesn't blare in your ears quite as loud at the start and end of every show. But otherwise, it's all gone down rather well. We're now at 71 chewing it over episodes. Can't believe that's happened. And it seems to be proving fairly popular. Thanks to those that join us live, of course, but then people then tune in on their commutes, etc., as many podcasts do, wherever it might be, Facebook, YouTube, etc. But then also it's available on Spotify and things like that as an audio podcast, and people are then getting in touch with me a few days later telling me that they've been listening, weighing in on the conversation, suggesting topics and posing questions. And so that's been really interesting and useful. So many thanks to those of you that have joined and joined the conversation, which is what it's all about, of course. So without further ado, I'm going to go to our questions that have been submitted. Well, reflections first on what has been an announcement that we made on Friday, I think it was, that it's our birthday. Physio Matters was born in December of 2013. And so it's often, summarize a year, it feels like a time for contemplating. I'm very guilty of that. I also do a lot of business strategizing around December. Clinically, things have always typically quietened off. Around my second opinion work becomes a very congested. Think about way back when. So I used to be a sort of consultant to sports clubs, and so your schedule for all games starts to really bunch up, and so typically it's not a good time for really doing much in way of sort of second opinion intervention stuff. And so things used to quieten down, so I used to strategize business stuff. So I've always tried to earmark this sort of time of year for that sort of thing. And it's also when we launched the podcast, so we sort of review some numbers and things like that. And what was useful as we were doing that was to notice that we'd gone over the 2.5 million downloads that Physio Matters has had across its various. I mean, the main thing is the main show, but then also we sort of summarized how many live streams we've done, excluding these ones. And it's just been a really interesting journey for us to have been on, to realize that 2.5 million downloads over the course of 7 years of monthly episodes, ever closer to that, that 100 months, which will be exciting. Not next year, year after, of course, we get to that. We don't want to rush things, don't want to throw out some. If we tossed up all the bonus episodes and stuff, of course, we've done more than 100 podcasts, but that 100 months is an exciting milestone for us to get to. And so it's been a real time of contemplation for me, trying to work out what it was we set this up for. What did we start Physio Matters for? Has it achieved some of its goals, all of its goals, any of the things that we hoped and dreamed of? And in all honesty, and I'm happy to take some questions on that if you do have any. But really, I'm fascinated to try and work out really what how has been achieved, what has changed, what has moved. It feels like sometimes the arguments are circular, and sometimes I think we contribute to that in a positive way, and sometimes maybe in a negative way. And there's lessons to learn across the way. But I'm definitely interested in, and feel free to pose any questions. I know that some of them have come in and we're going to visit those in later shows. But if you've got any thoughts as to what it means to you, then that's been really nice to see on social media as we celebrate. Also means that we've got some prizes that we're giving away, some presents. So check out physio-matters.com/birthday, and you will then be able to select for a dynamometer. We're giving away some merchandise from our store, online course for rheumatology physio, marketing consultation, Darren Campbell's handbook, a few different things that you can enter prizes for, enter us to win prizes there and select your prize as a thank you to you all for this wild journey that we've had. 7 years, 2.5 million downloads, madness. But a big question I want to ask the live audience above all else is, I'm going to touch on this at the end of this show and really want to talk to you about this. So a lot of people have been asking, do I set New Year's resolutions, either personally or for the business or whatever? And it's been a really interesting question. I want to flip it on you and say, is that something you bother with? Is it something that you care about? Is that, is that something you indulge? I mean, I've got my answer to that. I'm happy to visit it, and I will be talking about that at the end of the show. But I want to ask you that, is that something that you do? Is that something that you set on a personal level? Is that something that you might set yourself on your team, your family? Do you? I suppose I'm interested, especially if you set yourself something like that for your business or for other projects that you're involved in. That sort of interests me as well. So do let me know and join the conversation in that way at the end of the show. But the bigger one that came, most frequent question that was asked, and it's asked over the years, of course, but recently, as we announced the podcast to have hit 2.5 million downloads, people then saying, well, how can you have had so many people listen? How can you have so many guests on, but you still remain daft? And of course, that's one of the things that's been interesting, is that if you interview the best and brightest in the industry, the actual experts, as I describe it, then does any of it rub off? Do you actually? Is there any development that goes on there? And if so, how does that work educationally? Is that something that can be replicated? Is that something that can inform on an educational theory level? Is that something that, I'm often asked, is that something you would advise? Is there a case that if students get chance to interview or grill people, is that something that would be then an atmosphere in which they would then learn, or that would be a good way of them digesting new information? And I'm often, obviously, we don't know, and it's something that's difficult to really parse in the literature and the educational literature. So I've got a few answers to it, and I'm willing to talk about it. But it's definitely something that we've been said over the years, often as a fun piece of banter, really, is to say, how can you have interviewed the best and brightest in the game but still be stupid? That's been a fun thing that people enjoy accusing us of. But also, I think really I'm most interested in the way in which we can transmit and translate that knowledge for you guys. It's always sort of fascinating for me to try and work out who's learned from what we're doing. It's an education piece, really. It's something that that matters more than the actual person that's doing the interview. So happy, as I said, I can talk about how it was made and things like that. People sometimes bothered, but what I want to first touch on, as well as you guys post in the comments as to whether or not you bother with or engage with, or you're going to participate in any sort of New Year's resolution type stuff. And we'll come to that in a second. But yeah, to this first bit, does anything rub off on this? I think one of the things that's the whole point of it, really, in many ways at the start, was just because I really wanted to pick the brains of some of the smart folk that sort of were running courses I couldn't afford to go on, or I wanted to try and perpetuate a message and be and offer at least a devil's advocacy, if not a critical eye, and truly try and bring a journalistic style that wasn't just nod along agreeable. Because I felt like that was something that was already out there even at that time. It was still very early in podcasting, and the infrastructure was tough. You had to set up your own RSS feed and have an independent media host and stuff. It wasn't super complex for coding purposes, but it was still the bar to entry was a bit higher, which meant that we joined and weren't necessarily then competed with by too many too quickly. Helped us get a bit of a foothold, and I think we're very fortunate for that. But I think one of the things that's interesting is that when I've talked to so many folk in the industry, as well as then my team, of course, have then taken over many of those interviews, is that, yeah, I do think that there's something that can rub off. I don't think you can, imagine it'd be too easy if you could just try and leech all that information. So when you're actually conducting an interview, as if you can then draw on all of the goodness that's being shared, or that person's views across a topic that they've studied for many decades often. But I think that sometimes what I've noticed is that when there's such consistency that kind of emerges from them, you really find yourself noticing that. And so you might be interviewing, if you think back to that first year, you might interview Lee Herrington, Ian Horsley, Mike Stewart, Seth O'Neill. Then it was like into Anne Gates and Richard Bennett. It's just a brilliant first year when you look back at those podcasts. And I'm just, then if you extend that into the years, is that there's such unique topics. But then what are the commonalities, and start to realize, and they sort of naturally emerge. Now, the listeners might, I hope, notice that, but as an interviewer, you're really acutely attuned to that, whereby often in quick succession, you've got the echoes of the previous conversation or the interview rattling around in your mind. And so therefore, it might even color your questions into the next interview. And so what you're looking for is themes to emerge. So consistently, people might be saying, look, it's all about trying to create a decent rapport and have good communication skill with your patients and trying to elicit good information. Don't neglect your subjective cues, empathize appropriately, try and get people on side, try and inspire lifestyle changes that are going to be much more interesting than the fleeting changes that you can do with your hands or your exercises in clinic. And, these are sorts of things that came through very early doors. Don't underestimate the power of education, be that from Seth O'Neill saying, look, you want to educate them as to what's going on with their tendon and then motivate them to actually comply with the homework you might be giving them, to, of course, someone like Mike Stewart then talking about educational theory and the way in which that might be able to influence pain neurobiology. Just fascinating commonalities that are emerging, and I'm just talking about a few podcasts 7 years ago that are spaced out only by a few months. But then what I've reflected on from this question coming in so regularly is that I think that one of the things that's most useful is not necessarily like being that their smartness rubs off on us quite literally, because it's certainly, I don't necessarily think I think hopefully I'm a bit older and wiser just as time passes and stuff, and hopefully some of it you do get smarter. But it's not necessarily just by you being able to absorb that knowledge, because really that's not that much different to a listener. And I hope we're all smarter for the back of listening to these brilliant people. But I think as an interview, especially with the raw, uncut conversations, the thing that's different is I think you're really looking for, and I personally have found that you're really bothered about things being coherent across time. So you're often noticing if someone says something in response to your question and it doesn't cohere, it isn't consistent appropriately with what the previous guests have said or what the commonalities, like 5 or 6 guests have then spoken on a theme and clearly have an opinion in that direction. If there's something then that feels like it goes against that, not to say that that's wrong, you don't want to succumb to groupthink, but it kind of highlights it quite obviously. So your coherence is sort of a word that I'm using an awful lot at the moment, is because I think that really matters. Is where is there a bit of hypocrisy? Is someone holding something that they do like to a different standard to something that they don't like? Is there a style of practice that they are really involved in that they then are positioning that in a different way to what a previous guest might have done, even if they might agree on most things? Is there a difference there? And I think that that's what, as an interviewer and also as a team, we've come to sort of notice, is that where are those inconsistencies? And that doesn't just mean in the podcast. It's like when you're observing, and that's what we're doing. We're sort of social commentators in our MSK space, but also then we're observing the landscape of what MSK practice is across that clinically, educationally, and then in policy, even through MSKR. Is like, what are the common themes and threads, but where is the coherence, if it's there, or where is the incoherence? Where is the hypocrisy? Where is the double standard? And I hope that we've become decent arbiters of that. Like, we don't mean we don't succumb to them sometimes, and I'm plenty accused of that, but it's kind of that seems to be a real consistent thing we've come to notice, is that people are bothered about that that coherence, like we are. People are frustrated sometimes at the fact that it might not make sense, and it doesn't mean that everything, things are messy, it's complicated, the field is complicated. So one of the things that's consistent and coherent is the fact that it's complicated. We don't know everything. I'm not saying that everything has to make perfect sense, but it's just that then the train of thought and the broader narrative of what we're doing as an industry, where are we up to, and how has things, sometimes I offer it to a guest and say, how do you square this circle? How does that cohere with this point that's been made? And then say, well, I disagree with that. I think we've moved on from it. Or they say, oh, I've misphrased that. If you don't think that that's compatible, here's why I think it's compatible. That's that thing of just trying to make sure that obviously where there's differences, and that's great. But actually this this thing that's been picked up on more than knowledge rubbing off on us. I think as a team, we've come to realize that we're observing trends and themes in such a way. Now, there's an argument, though, that we then don't get chance as much as we used to get into the weeds of a topic, to really read every paper around the literature of a guest that we're on, so that you can understand who they're who even are the authors in agreement, and who are their academic nemesis that disagree, and trying to make sure that they're then understand and get chance to you pose that argument to them as part of devil's advocacy if you need to and stuff. I think probably we don't get chance to get into that granular detail as much as we'd like to. We've got plans in 2021 to try and redress that with some other interesting styles of content. It's one of the things that Physio Matters Plus as a membership platform is going to help us to unlock, is we're going to be able to have that really tight microscopic where we need to view, as well as the bird's eye view. And so that's been something that we've learned from. But as to the question as it was, does anything rub off from these actual experts and the best and brightest? I'd say that more than just their knowledge rubbing off, I think it's actually the opportunities for us to then understand the broad coherent narrative, if it is one, or any inconsistencies that might emerge from it, and trying to pick away. And I often say, scratch away at people's ideas and see what's underneath them. Is there anything that's been made superficial? Is there any deep bias that someone's not realizing? And that's been one of the biggest pleasures and privileges of my career, to be honest. Always really interested from that. Now, what I would then go on to say, so we've had Physio Matters' birthday. We've then been trying to work out what's rubbed off, if anything. Jim's posting. Here he is. He's on Periscope today. What's he saying? He said, "Are the duration of your questions proportional to how long the podcast has been around?" Yeah, I don't know. I have the question. I think the questions got longer and then they've come down a little bit, but they're still long. But they've always been long. So yeah. He's also said 2.5 million downloads, 40 to 50,000 a month. I think we're doing okay. Yeah, he's allowing himself to indulge a bit of swagger today, and I don't blame him. I've been pretty proud when I look at the numbers, and mainly proud of what we've been able to achieve. Obviously, always interested in what you guys think and how it feels and how what it means to you. And we're going to probably talk about that later in the week with some of our guests. But yeah, on to these New Year's resolutions. Do you bother with them? People asking me that. As to whether I do, both on a personal level, as a team, as a business, that sort of thing. I really enjoyed what Joe Turner said. Was it last week or week before? And we've got some content coming out with her on TLC later this week, probably later today. And she had a brilliant point made about the fact that you don't set yourself a specific narrow goal in which you're just going to fall off the wagon on. It's like, have the first opportunity to look back over the year. And I think it's one of the things that Joe's right, that has rubbed off on me, is that she's then made me give chance to just reflect back on the year and then work out what that might unveil, and has for me unveil areas in which you'd like to improve, be that self-improvement, be that team improvement, be that broader business strategy stuff. And so the answer is, as was with Joe at the time, it's like, no, I don't set myself specifics. I mean, I probably need to. I could benefit from, especially because I have got, when I need to, I'm better at freakish levels of self-determination. What's it called? Willpower and being determined. Is that if I just say, right, no chocolate or something like that, or just, make sure you run for an hour a day, then for the sake of absolutism, I can do that. It's the middle ground that sometimes I then overindulge, and I probably benefit from doing that, like for fitness and for stuff like that. Especially if I could set a New Year's resolution to actually sleep through the night, then that'd be nice. Maybe I can set the kids that, because that's still a bother for my health. But I'm not one for, and I don't think I used to not drink in January for a time. Not much drinking going on at the minute either, so it's not one for me to try and overcome vices and stuff like that necessarily. But I definitely do set myself. I do calendar years as units of change, of planning, of strategy. I find really useful. It's one of the frustrating things I've found when running businesses, is that you've got certain tax years, or you've got your own potentially defining your own tax year might be different to a calendar year, and it's like strategically, I like calendar years. I like quarters of those. And I think that one of the reasons is because, sort of family Christmas and stuff like that is kind of useful for us to sort of conclude and to allow that cultural boundary, as it often occurs, to really draw on. And I think that that's useful for me. But admittedly, the boring answer to that question is no, I don't typically. For what New Year's resolutions are for some people, I will not do this, or I swear to do this, or whatever. I'm not as overt as that. But I definitely do find it to be a useful time of reflection, as well as to set yourself some certain goals and markers and stuff. But as I said, do pay attention to what Joe Turner's got coming out today or tomorrow, because that's a treat. It's really decent format for sort of reflecting and to make some appropriate and sustainable goals that you're not likely to just, especially in a year like we've had, it'd be useful to try something new, try something different, and to also take a bit of pressure off yourself to not just double down on sort of one narrow sense of willpower, or one particular trait that you want to try and overcome or something like that. I think as the strategy goes, definitely as a team or as a business, I think it's useful to sort of set things out. I think it's a time where you're seeing that map, that timeline, projects when they need to rise and fall, especially if you're a company like ours where you've got certain event intervals where things necessarily get busy and you've got like a workflow strategy type thing that you need to try and sort out. We produce content that needs to map out and look at when that's going to rise and fall, and make sure your systems are in place. And so I think that's useful, but they're not New Year's resolutions as much as they are just opportunities to regroup. And I think that is decent. I think this year of all years, and I've said this is why this week's my last set of these shows, is because there is a chance that you could overindulge in that moving, that chess playing, and that strategizing, and not necessarily switching off as much and letting the cogs stop turning for a little bit. Now, this is where I could be accused of hypocrisy. Maybe I'm going to succumb to the same mistake here as I'm saying. So forgive me if I do already, but it's something I would say where possible, that yeah, you might down tools clinically, you might not be coming into the office, as I intend not to do, but then in your diary therefore might be not bookable and therefore a bit cleaner and stuff. And so if you then overindulge in thinking and strategizing, then potentially you're making a mistake to not really have a true downtime that allows yourself that cognitive break, or to get yourself out in nature and stuff as I plan to. So as I say, I hope to practice what I preach here. Really interested to see what your thoughts are. Let's have a little look at some of the questions. Rheumatology.physio. It's Jim again. He's saying, "What are you going to chew over acupuncture again?" I'm intrigued. I don't think I've even touched on acupuncture and chewing it over, so I don't know what he's on about. But anyway, I'm happy to. Is that a hot topic? Have I missed something on that? I know it's come back around. I saw it on Twitter a little bit, but it kind of bores me. But maybe we could visit that later in the week. Rob Bevan, awesome work. Looking forward to seeing what's in store for next year. And join me and Rob on Thursday. It's going to be really interesting reflections on the business year, but also a big announcement from us as to what we've got in store for what's next year, which you'll be hinting at. Joe Turner sent some smiley faces there. Thanks for tuning in, Joe. Really appreciate it. And as I've just said to you all, big plug for Joe's work. She gave a better answer to New Year's resolutions than I did. Mine was a big fat no, not really. But also, as I said, definitely a time for pondering, time for reflection. Many thanks for the questions that have been coming in. I hope I've done those justice today. Bit of a shorter show because we had a bit of a tech issue at the start, and I'm going to wrap up now. But really appreciating everything that you guys are doing, and this is only as good as the network, really. This show particularly, but also all the work that we're doing is pointless. It's all for you, and therefore the minute that you don't start enjoying it, or the minute that you feel that you can't feed back to try and offer a sense of self-improvement and be involved in Physio Matters, in Therapy Live, in MSKR, of course, but also that all the work that we're doing and producing is to try to, at the heart of it, raise standards in not just education, but across MSK healthcare and beyond. But generally speaking, raising standards across important issues that are close to my heart. And if we don't continue to work on the feedback loop that we've created through the network we have, then it all falls down. And so please don't be shy to get in touch wherever it might be that you listen to this stuff, but also privately on email. info@physio-matters.com is the central email. But also if you have me on LinkedIn, I've been getting some lovely comments and messages on LinkedIn Messenger. I'm really trying to pay attention to all these channels and just say, make sure I say thank you to enough people, because you guys are just absolutely phenomenal what you've done. And also later in the week, I need to start using these fancy ass Christmassy filters, don't I? Look at these. They're very sweet. Right, I'm going to clear off. And massive thanks to tuning in. Please, if you're going to get one show this week, make it the Friday one. Let's finish it with a bang. I'm going to give some pretty heavy reflections on the year, COVID stuff, all the other cultural features that have been going off this year. And get your questions in if you want. There's anything you really want me to touch. But definitely, I'm going to look forward to Friday's show. All right, take care. See you soon.